At her father-in-law's funeral, the daughter-in-law noticed a young woman, who seemed to be his mistress, sobbing uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law who had lived with her husband for many years wasn't just not sad. She was joyfully dancing. No Young-won is the most renowned and skilled psychiatrist in South Korea. She not only has a thriving career, but also manages her family with exceptional care and attention. Her father-in-law is a prosecutor. Her mother-in-law is a mystery novelist. Her husband is a plastic surgeon, and they have a handsome son. This family, with its status and reputation, is the envy and admiration of many. However, with the appearance of a mysterious woman, the secrets of this seemingly happy family begin to unravel, little by little. This woman, named Lee Si-na, had previously visited No Young-won's psychiatric clinic and confessed that she was in love with a married man. The man's family, she claimed, was completely incompatible with him. She questioned No Young-won about why they lived together meaninglessly just because they were family. She wanted to rescue the man from that fabricated family relationship. Lee Si-na further wondered what would happen if the man's family found out about their affair. Everyone in that family thinks they understand each other, but they actually know nothing about one another. Isn't that ridiculous? Lee Si-na asked No Young-won if she truly understood her own family. Lee Si-na's attitude made No Young-won uncomfortable. But as a psychiatrist, she patiently answered all of her questions. After seeing Lee Si-na off, No Young-won didn't give the matter much thought. Unexpectedly, a few days later, she received an anonymous package. Inside was the corpse of a small bird and a photograph of her entire family. On the card, it was written, "Is your family still okay?" No Young-won was chilled to the bone with fear. She recalled the words of her father from her childhood, "Life is like a slide. Sometimes you go up, and sometimes you go down." She tried to calm herself, determined to protect her family at all costs. But she had no idea that things beyond her control were already unfolding. Her mother-in-law, Hong Sa-gang, stood before her husband's bed in the middle of the night, gazing at the iron art installation she had commissioned for the wall. Her father-in-law, who was sleeping, startled awake and suggested that his wife take down the iron artwork. Otherwise, he would have nightmares because of it every night. But the wife refused. After returning to her room, she even cursed that the artwork would soon fall down. No Young-won's husband, Choi Yi-jin, lost control of his emotions and rushed into the bathroom. He scrubbed the blood off his hands. A female doctor helped Choi Yi-jin remove his surgical gown and then embraced him as he sat slumped on the floor, comforting him. Afterwards, she invited Choi Yi-jin to have dinner with her. Just as he left the hospital, Choi Yi-jin encountered a junior colleague. Therefore, he let the female doctor go have dinner with other colleagues, and he went to entertain the junior colleague. As the two men were eating, drinking, and talking merrily, No Young-won and her colleague also came to the same place. Seeing her husband and the junior colleague, Jin introduced the two to each other. No Young-won suddenly found the junior colleague familiar, but he said that he often saw her on television. No Young-won didn't ask any more questions, greeted her husband and his junior, and then left. Seeing Choi Yi-jin and the junior colleague talking so happily, she felt that something was wrong. On her way home, No Young-won learned that someone online had dug up her father's scandal from years ago, involving the alleged harassment of a female secretary. As No Young-won scrolled through the online comments, old memories flooded back. That year, when her father was a prosecutor, he was accused of corruption and sexually harassing his female secretary. That day, when she returned home, she saw her father talking to her father-in-law. Her father-in-law expressed his willingness to help, but felt powerless to do so. Her father explained to No Young-won that he was being framed, that he had never done those things. She demanded that her father prove his innocence. If he was telling the truth, then he could prove it. She had told him, "We become resilient when we stumble. Right now, you're stumbling, so be strong and protect our family." After saying that, she rushed out the door. Initially, she planned to go to the rooftop to relax, but halfway there, she heard a loud noise. Her father, unable to withstand the pressure, had passed away permanently. Her father's death caused No Young-won immense pain and regret. Now that someone was dredging up that painful past, she had no idea who they were or what their intentions were. Her father-in-law sent someone to investigate who had posted the article online, but they hadn't found any leads. Feeling frustrated, her father-in-law wanted Choi Yi-jin to sit down and have a drink with him. However, Hong Sa-gang prevented the father and son from talking. She said that her son was tired from the whole day and needed to rest. After their son left, the two of them no longer pretended with each other. Hong Sa-gang criticized her husband for having affairs and never being home, yet suddenly acting like a good father. She didn't want her son to be around his father and pick up his dirty habits. He had done many terrible things, and she had to handle everything smoothly to keep his prosecutor position. She didn't need her husband's gratitude, but he'd better not do anything to upset her. Her father-in-law criticized his wife in return. He said that she did those things just to maintain her own high-class image. If everything were exposed, she would be humiliated. The two disagreed about their perspectives. They both believed that they had compromised and restrained themselves to protect the family's happiness and create all the wonderful things they had today. But at this time, no one expected that this would be the last time they would argue. Her father-in-law went hiking and was struck by a falling rock, dying instantly at the scene. During the funeral, seeing that her mother-in-law was tired, Choi Yi-jin, along with Oh Jae-yoon, took her home. No Young-won stayed behind to greet the guests. But at this moment, she heard crying and was surprised to discover that the person crying was Lee Si-na, the woman who had come to her clinic for counseling. No Young-won asked Lee Si-na why she was here and if she knew her father-in-law. While the two were talking, Choi Yi-jin's bodyguards and staff were all staring at them intently. But Lee Si-na only said she was sorry and quickly left. No Young-won watched Lee Si-na's retreating figure, feeling that a secret no one knew was hidden behind her. When the funeral was over, No Young-won organized his belongings. Unexpectedly, she discovered a hidden iron safe behind the wall. She tried entering passwords, but all were incorrect. After thinking about it, she tried entering the date written after his favorite family photograph. This time, she successfully opened the safe. Using a hammer, she removed the contents, which were a notebook and a USB drive. She plugged the USB drive into the computer, and inside were folders containing videos of her husband from when he was a child. As she was touched by her father-in-law's deep love for her husband, she clicked on the last file. It played a recording. In the recording, her father-in-law ordered someone to bribe the female secretary, fabricating a harassment scandal to frame No Young-won's father. The person who caused her father's death was actually her father-in-law. This made her completely unable to believe it. No Young-won was devastated and couldn't understand why he would be the perpetrator, especially since her father and he were childhood friends. After her father passed away, he had taken her into his home, worrying about everything for her, from food and lodging to transportation. These events even contributed to the marriage between her and Choi Yi-jin. Now, the truth was revealed. Everything her father-in-law had done for her was just a false performance. The image of the kind father-in-law suddenly became disgusting. No Young-won couldn't accept this horrifying truth. Just as she wanted to investigate the truth, she suddenly heard music coming from Hong Sa-gang's room. She entered and found her mother-in-law dancing to the music with a light and graceful demeanor, as if she had been released from shackles. But this scene happening on someone who had just lost her husband, to No Young-won, it was extremely bizarre. She approached and turned off the music and asked Hong Sa-gang if she knew about her father-in-law's actions towards her father. Hong Sa-gang, after listening to the recording, showed no emotion whatsoever and said that she didn't know the details of what happened at that time. She remained calm and analyzed the situation for No Young-won. Now, both No Young-won's father and her father-in-law had passed away. If No Young-won wanted to report it to the police or reveal the truth to the public, the only people who would be harmed were their family. She asked her, if this truth were revealed, what would become of the family, and what was it that she needed to protect? All the choices were in No Young-won's hands. For the sake of her family's peace, No Young-won chose to hide the truth. No Young-won and her husband, Choi Yi-jin, were both simultaneously honored as Doctors of the Year. Hong Sa-gang watched her son and daughter-in-law stand on stage accepting the awards, brimming with satisfaction. The only blemish on her joy was that while her son specifically thanked his late father in his acceptance speech, he made no mention of her whatsoever. Little did she know that the son she considered her pride and joy was now incapable of even holding a scalpel steady during surgery. Choi Yi-jin entered the operating room, but he had to wear earphones, relying on soothing music to calm his nerves. He then allowed Oh Jae-yoon to perform the surgery in his place. After the operation, the patient's family approached Choi Yi-jin, eager to inquire about his condition. Choi Yi-jin was at a loss for words, and Oh Jae-yoon had to step in to help. She stated that Choi Yi-jin had personally performed the surgery and attributed all the success to him. The next day was the main anniversary of his father's death. The entire family visited the gravesite. Choi Yi-jin's aunt and his mother had a long-standing feud, leading to a heated argument between them. Before leaving, the aunt pulled No Young-won aside and asked if she knew about the plot details in Hong Sa-gang's novel. According to the aunt's son, rumors had been spreading online that Hong Sa-gang was the one who had killed her husband because the circumstances of the father-in-law's death described in the novel were identical to the events in her book. Upon returning to the clinic, No Young-won finished consulting with her patient. She then picked up the family photo from the anonymous letter on her desk. To her shock, she discovered that all 5 members of the family were numbered. Her father-in-law was number 1, followed by her husband, her mother-in-law, her son, and herself. She didn't understand what these numbers signified, but she felt a chilling sense of unease. The following day, No Young-won received another anonymous package. As she tried to figure out who had sent it, she suddenly received a call from her son's homeroom teacher. No Young-won went to the school. The homeroom teacher told her that her son had become like a different person recently. He had not only left the exam room without permission, but also refused to explain why. No Young-won took her son home. She respected his thoughts and was willing to wait until he wanted to talk. However, her son remained silent, not uttering a word. Back at home, No Young-won saw her husband's junior colleague visiting. Knowing that her son was struggling with math, he volunteered to tutor him. With permission granted, the junior colleague patted Choi Yi-jin on the shoulder, and the two of them stood up and left. There seemed to be an unspoken closeness between them. Before the strange feeling in No Young-won's heart could dissipate, her husband suggested that the junior colleague become their son's tutor. No Young-won saw that her son seemed happier under the junior colleague's guidance, so she didn't refuse her husband's suggestion. While the strange feeling the junior colleague evoked in No Young-won lingered, Lee Si-na appeared and spoke cryptic words. She only wanted to know what the relationship between her and her father-in-law was, but Lee Si-na didn't answer. Instead, she picked up the family photo on the table and asked if they were truly happy. If even their happiness was a lie, then it was truly tragic. After Lee Si-na left, the aunt came to find her again. This time, she brought along the novel written by her mother-in-law. No Young-won read the contents of the novel and investigated the online comments. She suspected that her father-in-law's death was truly shrouded in mystery. Therefore, she went to the police station to inquire about the cause of her father-in-law's death. The police also had their suspicions and stated that they had suggested an autopsy at the time, but the family had refused. Seeing her mother-in-law's signature on the refusal form, No Young-won became even more suspicious that everything was related to her mother-in-law. She took the novel to the site where the incident with her father-in-law occurred to investigate. Her father-in-law had been running on this mountain for decades, so he understood the road conditions here very well. Therefore, the possibility of him having an accident was very low. She suspected there was a second person at the scene at the time. She saw a figure in front of her, and when the person turned around, she was shocked to realize it was her mother-in-law, Hong Sa-gang. She asked her why she was there. Hong Sa-gang said that she was taking a walk and dropped her lighter. Then, she asked No Young-won why she was there. When she saw her novel in No Young-won's hand, Hong Sa-gang immediately asked if she was suspecting her. The two directly got to the point of what they wanted to know. No Young-won asked her mother-in-law why she refused the autopsy and whether her father-in-law's death was related to her. In her mother-in-law's mind, a bad man like her father-in-law, it wouldn't be unusual for someone to want to kill him. If her father-in-law was really murdered, it would be better to tell everyone that he was hit by a rock. No Young-won wasn't sure if her mother-in-law's words were true, but there was currently no other evidence to suspect her mother-in-law. She could only pause temporarily. That evening, Choi Yi-jin told No Young-won that he would be attending a scientific conference tomorrow, so he would be leaving early. However, the next day, No Young-won received an anonymous message. The sender asked her if she really understood her husband. It included several photos of her husband laughing and talking with a woman, even holding hands with her. No Young-won immediately called her husband, but no one answered. She went to the conference venue and discovered that the event was not taking place at all. At this moment, her husband's phone called. No Young-won asked her husband where he was, and her husband replied that he had just left the hallway of the conference. No Young-won did not reveal her husband's lie. In the evening, when her husband was sound asleep, No Young-won secretly checked his phone but discovered that the password had been changed. Then, she checked the dashcam in the car, but all the data recorded today had been completely deleted. While searching for suspicious items, she heard the phone ringing. She took out the phone from the gap and realized that the call was actually from her younger brother. It turned out that this phone was her younger brother's, who had dropped it in the car. No Young-won immediately asked her younger brother why his phone was in her brother-in-law's car. Her younger brother couldn't answer this question. Suspicion began to arise in No Young-won. She kept asking her younger brother questions. Was there something between the two that she didn't know? Her younger brother told her that because her brother-in-law invited him to dinner, he accidentally dropped his phone in the car. Back in her room, No Young-won started checking the car's entry and exit history by entering her husband's license plate number. The results shocked her. Her husband had been frequently visiting the place her younger brother had mentioned. Every member of the family was hiding their own secrets. No Young-won was so worried that she forgot about opening the anonymous package she had received. The assistant noticed this and volunteered to help her open the box. No Young-won still felt nervous, fearing that there might be something terrible inside. She stood far away, not daring to approach too closely. Surprisingly, there was only a model inside the box. No Young-won carefully examined it and discovered an address on the model. She pondered for a moment. After discovering this, she recalled memories from her childhood. At that time, both No Young-won's family and her father-in-law's family gathered in the yard for dinner. Back then, Hong Sa-gang and her father-in-law had a conflict, and she took Choi Yi-jin, who was playing, away. Her father-in-law then called No Young-won out to play with him in the yard. No Young-won looked up and inadvertently met Hong Sa-gang's cold gaze. To clarify the issue, No Young-won immediately drove there. Upon arriving, she pushed the room's door open and discovered a novel by Choi Yi-jin's mother placed on the sofa. Next to it was a bouquet of flowers, but what made No Young-won's skin crawl was that she found a woman lying on the floor. Her entire body was covered in blood, and that person was Oh Jae-yoon, her husband's colleague. No Young-won approached and checked if the person was still breathing. At this moment, a voice sounded from behind, "She's not dead yet." The person who spoke was No Young-won's mother-in-law, Choi Yi-jin's mother. Mrs. Choi Yi-jin hurriedly explained that she didn't do this. She had only arrived here a few minutes ago. When she arrived, the female doctor was already lying unconscious. No Young-won wanted to call the police, but her mother-in-law stopped her. She said that since both of them appeared here together, they would definitely be subject to police investigation. Moreover, when this news spread, No Young-won and Choi Yi-jin's reputation would be affected. Hearing this, No Young-won and her mother-in-law took the female doctor into the car and drove her to a nearby hospital. The female doctor didn't suffer any serious danger, only a head injury that led to a coma. No Young-won thought about this matter for a long time, not knowing who ultimately wanted to harm Oh Jae-yoon. She still wanted to call the police, but her mother-in-law stopped her again. She thought that perhaps this was caused by Choi Yi-jin. Choi Yi-jin had once said he would sell that villa, but has kept it until now. The only people who know the villa's location are their family. Oh Jae-yoon's unprovoked appearance there is definitely related to Choi Yi-jin. No Young-won mentioned that she had received an anonymous message with blatant lies and a model. It seemed like someone was guiding her to this villa. Furthermore, she had also received photos of Choi Yi-jin at the villa. The conference that Choi Yi-jin had been attending for the past year didn't exist. The place her husband went to every week to attend the conference was this villa. No Young-won suspected that Choi Yi-jin was having an affair with Oh Jae-yoon, so she went to the villa. Her mother-in-law was also present at this villa, which couldn't help but raise No Young-won's suspicions. Facing No Young-won's suspicious gaze, her mother-in-law explained that she was just getting some fresh air and happened to be passing by. After speaking, she immediately left to find her son, whom she still couldn't contact. When she returned to the villa, manager Hong, who worked for her, was there. Hong Sa-gang went up to the second floor and found the bedding in disarray, with signs that someone had been staying there. This reminded her of the scene she had once witnessed, her husband and another woman intertwined on that very bed. Manager Hong signaled her to look at the items on the table. She picked up a framed photo, which showed Choi Yi-jin with a short-haired woman. Next to it was a book. Hong Sa-gang looked at the book with a meaningful gaze, as if she had recognized who the woman who had been there was. No Young-won still couldn't contact Choi Yi-jin. She went to the hospital to look for her husband, but he wasn't at work. As she was preparing to leave the hospital, she unexpectedly saw her younger brother appear there. She immediately asked her younger brother about the ambiguous relationship between him and Choi Yi-jin. Her younger brother recalled the last time he went to see his brother-in-law to borrow money. He saw his brother-in-law rushing away. He had followed him and discovered that his brother-in-law went to a gathering, but the location of that gathering was not a place that No Young-won knew. Unable to gather useful information, No Young-won told her younger brother to get out of the car. A few minutes later, the phone rang, and No Young-won discovered that her younger brother had forgotten his phone in the car. After talking to her younger brother on the phone, No Young-won unexpectedly found Oh Jae-yoon's phone dropped in the back seat. To understand the relationship between Oh Jae-yoon and her husband, No Young-won returned to the hospital. She used Oh Jae-yoon's finger to unlock the phone. She discovered that there were many photos of Choi Yi-jin in the phone. One of the photos was of Choi Yi-jin and Oh Jae-yoon as children, taken with her mother-in-law. No Young-won couldn't believe that the two of them were childhood sweethearts. She immediately went home to confront her mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law explained that the family had supported Oh Jae-yoon since she was young because she was an orphan. However, there was nothing between Choi Yi-jin and her. It was just that Oh Jae-yoon had a one-sided crush on Choi Yi-jin. After speaking, she used Oh Jae-yoon's phone to send a message in the work group, announcing that she was taking a vacation in order to avoid suspicion. Then, she deleted all the photos of Choi Yi-jin in Oh Jae-yoon's phone. Back in her room, No Young-won continued to check Oh Jae-yoon's phone and discovered that on the day Choi Yi-jin attended the meeting, Oh Jae-yoon had texted him, telling him to hand over the hospital to her and go attend the meeting with peace of mind. No Young-won immediately became suspicious. If it wasn't Oh Jae-yoon, then who was the woman with her husband? Choi Yi-jin and Oh Jae-yoon disappeared at the same time. Her mother-in-law worried that if this continued, it would cause more suspicion, so she staged a play herself. She arranged for people to spread rumors that they had discovered a camera in the hospital's restroom and accused the hospital of violating privacy. The police came to investigate and collect evidence. Taking this opportunity, her mother-in-law announced the closure of the hospital for renovations. No Young-won once again suspected that her mother-in-law was hiding something that couldn't be revealed. Her mother-in-law took out her phone. She showed No Young-won an anonymous message that she had received on the 49th day memorial service for her husband's death. The message read, "How would you feel if the husband you wanted to kill suddenly disappeared?" No Young-won also told her mother-in-law about the items she had received by mail. Hong Sa-gang asserted that it was like a template. Even her father-in-law being harmed was like in the novel. It was a very obvious imitation. She also showed No Young-won a video. In the video, Choi Yi-jin was frantically wiping away blood stains in the trunk of a car and smashing a surveillance camera. The mother-in-law believed in Choi Yi-jin's character, thinking that he was being used by someone, and that they had all fallen into a sophisticated trap. She asked No Young-won to stand by her side and find the person behind it all. At that moment, a man claiming to be Koo Kyung-tae Oh Jae-yoon's boyfriend came looking for her. He said that he had been trying to contact her but couldn't reach her. No Young-won and her mother-in-law lied, saying that Oh Jae-yoon might just be taking some time off to relax. Unexpectedly, Koo Kyung-tae presented his police badge and said that, with a police officer's intuition, he was sure that the matter was not simple and must be investigated thoroughly. No Young-won and her mother-in-law were worried and uneasy. After Koo Kyung-tae left, the mother-in-law led No Young-won to Oh Jae-yoon's house. She took out a box of powder, dipped a brush into it, and gently blew it onto the keypad lock, revealing the fingerprints. The two entered the house. The mother-in-law told No Young-won to pack some of Oh Jae-yoon's clothes, while she hid the phone in a discreet place to create the appearance that the female doctor was on vacation. Just then, the sound of the door opening suddenly rang out. The two immediately hid in the closet. The person who came was Oh Jae-yoon's boyfriend. He was worried because he couldn't find his girlfriend, angrily pounding his chest in frustration. Suddenly, he felt as if there was someone in the closet and went to open it. No Young-won and her mother-in-law were terrified. But at the most dangerous moment, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. The person knocking on the door was Manager Hong. He pretended to be Oh Jae-yoon's uncle. Koo Kyung-tae believed him without a doubt and told Manager Hong that his girlfriend had mysteriously disappeared. Manager Hong took the phone, quickly swiping through it in front of Koo Kyung-tae, confirming that Oh Jae-yoon had just gone on vacation and had texted him. Koo Kyung-tae suspected that someone else had used his girlfriend's phone to send the messages. Then, he called his girlfriend's phone number. Unexpectedly, the phone's vibration came from inside the room. Koo Kyung-tae tilted his ear to listen, finally staring at the closet. The risk of No Young-won and her mother-in-law being exposed was imminent. Manager Hong then patted Koo Kyung-tae on the head and criticized his action of trying to open the closet door. No Young-won took the opportunity to push the phone out of the crack in the closet door, creating the appearance that the phone had fallen out. Manager Hong fabricated that Oh Jae-yoon forgot to take her phone with her, then put his arm around Koo Kyung-tae and left, inviting him out for a drink. No Young-won and her mother-in-law had escaped danger. Both of them were still bewildered and frightened. Unexpectedly, as soon as they got home, a man was standing waiting at the door. This man claimed to be a detective working for her father-in-law. Before he passed away, he had commissioned the detective to investigate someone. The detective took out a photo of Choi Yi-jin and Lee Si-na, but the mother-in-law immediately grabbed the photo, intending to destroy it. Unexpectedly, the detective then poured out a bag full of other photos. Lee Si-na was Choi Yi-jin's lover. It turned out that her father-in-law didn't want No Young-won to be hurt, so he had asked the detective to investigate Lee Si-na. He discovered that she was a femme fatale who had been married twice and had one affair. All three men had died mysteriously. The first died from pufferfish poisoning, the second drowned, and the third died in a fire. Lee Si-na received 3 large insurance payouts from these 3 deaths. Because of this, she was called the Whistling Femme Fatale. No Young-won suspected that Lee Si-na was harming people for insurance money. But the detective said that because there was no convincing evidence, it was impossible to draw a conclusion. The mother-in-law exclaimed in horror, "I should have dealt with her sooner." At this point, No Young-won realized that her mother-in-law had known about Lee Si-na's existence for a long time. The detective guessed that this wasn't a simple affair. It was possible that Choi Yi-jin was currently in great danger and was the next target for Lee Si-na's 4th funeral. Hong Sa-gang was so worried that she was almost driven crazy. Fearing that something would happen to her son, Choi Yi-jin, she wanted to immediately report it to the police to save her son. But No Young-won stopped her. She was worried that if this matter spread, it would affect her reputation and career. She didn't want her achievements to vanish like smoke because of someone so terrible. She decided that she would go find Choi Yi-jin. She'd rather he die by her hand than die by the hand of the femme fatale. After filming the counseling program, No Young-won received an anonymous package. Inside was a model car with the license plate number of her husband, Choi Yi-jin. She hurriedly ran outside to stop the delivery person and asked who the sender was. But the delivery person only said that the person wore a hat and glasses covering their face, so he couldn't tell if it was male or female. Disappointed by the answer, No Young-won dejectedly returned to the office. She carefully examined the model car and discovered an address on it. Upon opening it, she saw a video of the model car plunging into the sea with the eerie laughter of a woman. No Young-won was both frightened and uneasy. Suddenly, she remembered her mother-in-law's words, "They've fallen into a carefully laid trap." No Young-won quickly ran to find her mother-in-law. At that moment, Hong Sa-gang was being summoned by the police to make a statement. The police had caught the person secretly filming cameras at the hospital. The police asked her why they hadn't seen director Choi Yi-jin at the hospital. Just as Hong Sa-gang was about to speak, No Young-won arrived in time and said that her husband was away on a business trip. The person arrested was deliberately arranged by Manager Hong. The person handling this case was the female doctor's boyfriend, Koo Kyung-tae. He suspected that the mother-in-law and No Young-won had staged the whole thing. A police officer asked the person who planted the hidden camera why they did it. All eyes were tensely focused on him. The person who planted the camera said it was because they loved director Choi Ye-jin, but their feelings weren't reciprocated. Hearing that, Hong Sa-gang chose to forgive the misguided love of the person who planted the camera and told him to try to forget her son. After resolving this matter, No Young-won, under the guise of a psychologist, invited Koo Kyung-tae to her clinic. She wanted to approach Oh Jae-yoon's boyfriend to search for Choi Ye-jin's car and encourage him to reveal his worries about his girlfriend. No Young-won took the opportunity to inform Koo Kyung-tae that not only was Oh Jae-yoon missing, but her husband, Choi Ye-jin, had also been missing for a long time. She said that the two of them might be together. To find them, they must first find Choi Ye-jin's car. Koo Kyung-tae believed this and asked No Young-won to wait for news from him. When she returned home, No Young-won discovered a man changing clothes in the room. She thought it was her husband, but when the person turned around, she realized it was her husband's junior colleague. The junior colleague had come to tutor her son. He explained that his clothes had been stained with juice, so No Young-won's son had told him to borrow Choi Ye-jin's clothes. The next day, Koo Kyung-tae met with No Young-won and showed her images recorded from Choi Ye-jin's driving route. The car headed south, stopping at toll booths and service areas. There was a woman in Choi Ye-jin's car, but it wasn't Oh Jae-yoon. No Young-won understood everything clearly. She took the tablet from Koo Kyung-tae's hand and discovered that the woman accompanying Choi Ye-jin was Lee Si-na. The two of them were being intimate with each other. Witnessing her husband's betrayal firsthand, No Young-won flew into a rage. She couldn't believe that the husband who always had a gentle smile was hiding such a despicable secret. She didn't know where to vent her anger, only knowing to tightly grip the metal bar in the car to uncover the truth. No Young-won drove to the place where the surveillance camera had recorded her husband's car stopping, but she didn't expect her mother-in-law to have arrived there before her. The two met at the rest area. No Young-won curiously asked how her mother-in-law knew about this place. As it turned out, her mother-in-law was very good at deduction. That day, she had seen No Young-won talking to Koo Kyung-tae, so she told Manager Hong to start investigating from the police's side as well. Manager Hong, under the guise of Oh Jae-yoon's uncle, visited the police station to inquire and happened to see him looking up information about Choi Ye-jin's car. The mother-in-law was worried about her son's safety, while No Young-won was enduring the pain of her husband's betrayal. The two faced each other with immense tension, but because their common goal was to find Choi Ye-jin, they were forced to join forces. The two continued on their way, and finally, as night fell, they found Choi Ye-jin's car. The mother-in-law inquired at the car repair shop next door and learned that Choi Ye-jin had left his car there, then rented another car to go to a nearby island. Since there wasn't a ferry to the island until the next day, No Young-won and her mother-in-law had to wait overnight to find him. The mother-in-law called Manager Hong to come, and No Young-won also called her younger brother. During the meal, the mother-in-law received a video call from the hospital director, reporting that Oh Jae-yoon had regained consciousness. No Young-won asked the doctor if she had seen Choi Ye-jin at the villa that day, but she shook her head. Oh Jae-yoon suddenly lost control, saying that everyone was going to die, and then unexpectedly fainted. Her deranged state made everyone have a bad feeling. On the way to the island, No Young-won asked her mother-in-law about when Choi Ye-jin and Lee Si-na started seeing each other. The mother-in-law didn't hide anything anymore. In fact, she had noticed something unusual about her son a year and a half ago. On one occasion, she saw her son joyfully seeing Lee Si-na off. During that time, her son paid particular attention to his appearance, practicing reasons in front of the mirror to invite Lee Si-na out. Being perceptive, she knew something was up with her son, so she followed him and found Lee Si-na's place. She directly handed a check to Lee Si-na. Lee Si-na accepted the check, and she thought that she would comply with the agreement. Choi Ye-jin also said that he had broken up with Lee Si-na. She was sure that the relationship had ended a long time ago, but she didn't expect them to continue their entanglement. No Young-won questioned her mother-in-law why she didn't tell her at the time. "Because we are a family," the mother-in-law replied. She wanted No Young-won to analyze Lee Si-na's psychology. If it was really like the detective said, that Lee Si-na was a scammer aiming to steal a huge insurance payout, but she had known Choi Yi-jin for a long time without making any moves. Quickly, the four of them successfully set foot on the island. The mother-in-law analyzed that her son liked to study cuisine. Whenever he went to a new place, he would try the local specialties, so they started searching from the delicious restaurants. The four came to the most famous restaurant in the area. The mother-in-law held up Lee Si-na's picture and asked the owner if he had seen this person before. The owner recalled that 3 days ago, 2 people had come here. At that time, there was a man with this woman. Both of them ordered a table full of food, but the woman didn't eat much, while the man devoured everything, constantly eating one dish after another. The mother-in-law found it strange because Choi Yi-jin usually didn't eat much, but the owner and staff insisted that Choi Yi-jin had eaten a lot. They even mistook them for filming a live food program. As the mother-in-law was about to leave, she suddenly heard a warning siren from outside. The staff in the store reported that it seemed like someone wanted to commit suicide. The police had pulled a car out of the sea. The mother-in-law worried that it might be her son. Immediately, she and the others ran over. When they arrived at the scene, they saw a black car being pulled up from the water. The license plate fell to the ground. It was the car that Choi Yi-jin had rented. Choi Yi-jin's mother was so shocked she could barely breathe. But just then, the car door was forced open by the water inside. A large package fell out from within. No Young-won and her mother-in-law looked at each other. From each other's eyes, they sensed fear and unease. When the police opened the package, they found only a blanket inside. The 2 women breathed a sigh of relief. The police recognized No Young-won and asked about her relationship with the missing person. Since things had come to this, they had to seek the police's help to find Choi Yi-jin. Hong Sa-gang and her daughter-in-law had no choice but to report to the police, recounting the situation of Choi Yi-jin and Lee Si-na's disappearance together. Based on the video on the island, the police discovered that the 2 had rented a car in Tongdong on Thursday. By Saturday evening, the car had entered the inner harbor but hadn't been seen leaving. However, there were no surveillance cameras inside the harbor. The police suspected that the 2 had been thinking dark thoughts and decided to search for bodies in the sea. Hong Sa-gang still firmly believed that her son was not dead. Just then, the police discovered the inn where Choi Yi-jin and Lee Si-na had stayed. Everyone immediately went to the inn. The innkeeper said that the 2 had rented a room for a month and paid in cash, but they had checked out some time ago. The police entered the room to investigate and found Choi Yi-jin's suicide note. The letter stated that throughout his short life, like a fast-forwarding movie, he had more pain than happy memories. Therefore, Choi Yi-jin had chosen to leave and hoped his beloved family would forgive this selfish decision. After reading the suicide note, Hong Sa-gang nearly fainted. She couldn't believe that Choi Yi-jin had abandoned her like this. Stepping out of the room, she saw a little girl playing on a trampoline. In her daze, she saw herself hugging Choi Yi-jin as a child, jumping on the trampoline. She seemed to go insane, chasing the little girl away and jumping on the trampoline herself, trying to relive every moment with her son. No Young-won had to stop her mother-in-law's actions. Sa-gang retorted to No Young-won, asking if Choi Yi-jin's life or death was uncertain. Was No Young-won feeling happy that she had taken revenge on the husband who had cheated on her? She even said bitterly that if something really happened to Choi Yi-jin, she would never forgive No Young-won. When everyone returned to the police station, the police analyzed that there were no traces of Choi Yi-jin and Lee Si-na using their phones or credit cards, and they had also left a suicide note. Therefore, the case could almost be closed. Choi Yi-jin's mother nearly became hysterical, firmly believing that her son was still alive. No Young-won's younger brother also stood beside her, criticizing the police for their ineffective work. No Young-won advised the 2 to calm down, but they both blamed her for being cold-hearted. No Young-won also felt a lot of pain, but she had her son. For her son, she had to be strong. No Young-won suggested that everyone go home and wait for news from the police, but Hong Sa-gang insisted on staying to find Choi Yi-jin. No Young-won called her son, intending to say she would be home late, but Choi Yi-jin's junior colleague answered the phone. The junior colleague said that her son was studying, so he answered the call for him. No Young-won didn't say anything more, and the junior colleague hung up with a puzzled expression. On the way driving home, No Young-won couldn't hold back anymore and burst into tears. Although she hated her husband for cheating, she was still worried that something bad might have happened to him. Her heart continuously endured torment. To investigate the truth about her husband's disappearance, No Young-won sought out Oh Jae-yoon to ask about what happened on the night she went to the villa. Oh Jae-yoon recalled that she had seen Choi Yi-jin rushing out of work that day, and she felt that something was wrong. She followed Choi Yi-jin to the villa and saw flowers and wine set out on the table. The next second, she was knocked to the ground by Lee Si-na. In a daze, Oh Jae-yoon heard Lee Si-na say, "Everyone is going to die." Thinking about this, Oh Jae-yoon became agitated. No Young-won wanted to know the reason for her husband's affair, but Oh Jae-yoon only said that No Young-won didn't understand anything about Choi Yi-jin and refused to say anything else. To understand better, No Young-won went to Choi Yi-jin's office to look for clues. No Young-won noticed, based on surgical records, that Oh Jae-yoon was the assistant for every surgery where Choi Yi-jin was the lead surgeon. She opened Choi Yi-jin's computer and discovered that all the surveillance videos had been deleted. No Young-won guessed that these videos might contain Choi Yi-jin's secrets, so she asked someone to recover the data. After the computer was restored, No Young-won opened the videos and was shocked to discover that, despite being the lead surgeon, Choi Yi-jin only sat in the operating room. The person who actually performed the surgeries was Oh Jae-yoon. No Young-won couldn't believe it, and she blamed herself for not noticing anything unusual from her husband during all the years they lived together. Soon after, No Young-won received a picture from the police. She immediately recognized it as the watch she had given Choi Yi-jin on their wedding anniversary. The watch had just been pulled out of the sea, which further proved that Choi Yi-jin was dead. No Young-won recalled every moment with her husband, the sweet memories appearing before her eyes. But now, it was likely that they would be separated forever. Thinking about that, No Young-won couldn't hold back her tears and burst into sobs. Next, No Young-won received a call from her mother-in-law. Since Choi Yi-jin's body still hadn't been found, Hong Sa-gang still believed that her son was alive. It turned out that, in the past few days, Hong Sa-gang had discovered a clue from a boatman. The boatman had seen Lee Si-na go fishing late at night, then get on a boat and leave. Hong Sa-gang gave money to the boatman to take her to the place where Lee Si-na got off the boat. When they arrived, the mother-in-law noticed a surveillance camera overhead. In the video, Choi Yi-jin gave the boatman some money, then left with Lee Si-na. Hong Sa-gang confirmed that Choi Yi-jin was alive and couldn't contain her radiant joy. Just as No Young-won hung up with her mother-in-law, she received a call from the bank. The bank employee asked her why she had suddenly withdrawn all of the family's savings. No Young-won had absolutely no idea what was going on, until the bank employee said that the transaction had been made at the Tongdung branch. At this moment, No Young-won realized that this was what her husband had done. She couldn't understand. If her husband really wanted to die, why would he withdraw such a large amount of money? She saw in the surveillance video that her husband was carrying a small black bag, which surely contained all the cash he had withdrawn. Just then, No Young-won received another anonymous video. In the video, her husband personally pushed the rented car into the sea, then turned and ran towards Lee Si-na, saying, "Lee Si-na, maybe I'll finally be happy now." No Young-won couldn't believe that Choi Yi-jin himself had pushed the car into the sea. At this point, she couldn't tell what was real and what was fake. She was so angry that she couldn't contain herself and screamed. Her assistant rushed in to tell her that the scandal of her husband's affair and disappearance was now spreading like wildfire online. The entire clinic was surrounded by reporters. No Young-won was worried about her son. She was shocked that her house was also being watched by reporters. Just as No Young-won was confused about what to do, her mother-in-law suddenly started a live stream. Choi Yi-jin's mother told everyone that all the rumors online were untrue. The missing person was not Choi Yi-jin. The reporters thought it was just a publicity stunt and, no longer waiting, dispersed. When they returned home, the mother-in-law still insisted that Choi Yi-jin was being manipulated by Lee Si-na and that they needed to quickly save Choi Yi-jin. But No Young-won decided to give up the search. From now on, in her life, Choi Yi-jin was as good as dead. While the two women were silently confronting each other, on the other side, Choi Yi-jin was happily swimming in the water. Lee Si-na was watching Hong Sa-gang's livestream. When she saw Hong Sa-gang denying that the missing person was Choi Yi-jin, Lee Si-na put the tablet down and called Choi Yi-jin to swim towards her. Choi Yi-jin listened and swam over, unaware that Lee Si-na would suddenly reach out and brutally push his head underwater. From a young age, Lee Si-na had always been treated unfairly by her parents. This led to her psychology becoming twisted and her personality becoming increasingly extreme. Her husband bought her a birthday cake, but just because he ate the cake before she blew out the candles, she pushed him into a fire pit and watched him burn alive. When the police asked about the cause of her husband's death, Lee Si-na, like a madwoman, was immersed in her own world. She refused to answer questions and casually whistled. She once came to No Young-won for counseling, wondering why her loved ones all left her. After learning about the things Lee Si-na had done, No Young-won analyzed that Lee Si-na's own actions had caused pain for her family. Lee Si-na didn't accept that the fault was her own. She felt that she had done so much to protect her family but was always blamed. No Young-won continued to advise her that families should be connected by love. Lee Si-na didn't accept No Young-won's confidence and asked her what kind of family she was living with, what made her so confident. To break No Young-won's confidence, Lee Si-na, with her twisted psychology, went to Choi Yi-jin's hospital to treat the scar on her neck. After finishing the treatment, she proactively invited Choi Yi-jin to dinner and acted friendly towards him. Gradually, the relationship between the two began to change. Choi Yi-jin took Lee Si-na to the villa, and Lee Si-na told him about the origin of the scar on her neck. When her father took the whole family on a business trip, she preferred to stay in the hotel and refused to go out. Meanwhile, her parents and older sister went out, had an accident on the road, and all died. She hated herself for being lucky enough to survive. She wanted to endure the same pain as her family, which was why the scar appeared. Lee Si-na's madness didn't scare Choi Yi-jin. On the contrary, it made him have a need to express himself. He began to talk about his family. His father was promiscuous, philandering, causing his mother to break down many times. Later, his mother gave up, only living to raise him. This made him feel guilty towards his mother, so he listened to her every word. Although his mother knew he was afraid of blood, she still insisted on making him study medicine, and he had long lost the ability to resist. As for his wife, No Young-won, he thought that she needed a perfect husband. If she knew that he had asked someone else to perform the surgeries, she certainly wouldn't be able to accept it. Lee Si-na wiped away Choi Yi-jin's tears, encouraging him to release all his emotions in front of her. Choi Yi-jin found salvation and promised to make Lee Si-na happy. Having won Choi Yi-jin's heart, Lee Si-na began the next step in her plan. She sent No Young-won the dead dove and the photos, then followed her father-in-law to the cemetery, listening to him confess his sins before No Young-won's father's grave. At her father-in-law's funeral, she looked at his portrait and said an incomprehensible sentence. "Why did you die? How boring." After that, Lee Si-na disguised herself as a service staff. On the day No Young-won received the award, she had someone send No Young-won the model of the villa. Oh Jae-yoon was not originally in Lee Si-na's plan, but she had followed Choi Yi-jin and arrived at the villa, interrupting the one-year anniversary of Lee Si-na and Choi Yi-jin's meeting. Lee Si-na had knocked Oh Jae-yoon unconscious, scaring Choi Yi-jin and making him want to call for emergency services. Lee Si-na stopped him, using Oh Jae-yoon's fingerprint to unlock her phone, showing Choi Yi-jin that before coming here, Oh Jae-yoon had called his mother. When Oh Jae-yoon didn't return, his mother would definitely come looking for her. Lee Si-na revealed that Oh Jae-yoon wasn't there to help him, but a pawn that Choi Yi-jin's mother had planted beside him, doing everything on her orders. After saying that, Lee Si-na dragged Choi Yi-jin away and planned their fake death. Choi Yi-jin pushed the car into the river, then happily ran towards Lee Si-na, believing that when he escaped from his old life, he would be truly happy. While Choi Yi-jin was swimming, Lee Si-na watched Mrs. Hong Sa-gang's livestream denying the rumors. Then, she put down the tablet and ordered Choi Yi-jin to swim back. She pushed Choi Yi-jin's head underwater ruthlessly. Only when she saw someone approaching did she let go. Choi Yi-jin angrily questioned, "What are you doing?" Lee Si-na said coldly, "You just died and came back to life. So, from now on you have to live a completely new life. Meanwhile, No Young-won and her mother-in-law were still arguing. No Young-won insisted that she no longer cared about whether Choi Yi-jin lived or died. As far as she was concerned, Choi Yi-jin was dead, and she wouldn't let her son be affected by this. Mrs. Choi Yi-jin, wanting to clarify Lee Si-na's purpose, ordered the manager to bring the items that Lee Si-na had left in the villa. She found the detective novel that she had written among them. She believed that Lee Si-na was a crazed mental patient, obsessed with detective novels, sometimes even imitating the plotlines in the novels that she liked. Hong Sa-gang then wanted the manager to take her somewhere, but was informed that Oh Jae-yoon had come to the house. While waiting for Mrs. Hong Sa-gang to return, Oh Jae-yoon toured the house. Seeing No Young-won's dress, she couldn't resist trying it on. However, she couldn't zip it up on her own. At this time, the junior colleague unexpectedly appeared and helped her zip it up. Not only that, but the junior also took No Young-won's necklace and put it on Oh Jae-yoon's neck, feeling that it suited her very well. The junior also told Oh Jae-yoon that Choi Yi-jin had told him that he relied on her a lot and trusted Oh Jae-yoon very much. The junior thought that Oh Jae-yoon understood Choi Yi-jin better than his family. Just then, they heard Mrs. Sa-gang returning. Oh Jae-yoon was flustered, and the junior told her not to worry, he would go downstairs first to stall for time. Oh Jae-yoon quickly changed back into her clothes and hurriedly went downstairs. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang looked at her for a few seconds, seemingly thinking about something. Now, No Young-won knew that Choi Yi-jin couldn't hold a surgical knife. Therefore, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang wanted to hand over the hospital to Oh Jae-yoon, but she only cared about No Young-won and Choi Yi-jin's marriage. Oh Jae-yoon believed that without her sacrifice, Choi Yi-jin would not have achieved the success he had today. She wanted to replace No Young-won to become the mistress of the family. Mrs. Choi Yi-jin warned her not to have any wishful thinking. Oh Jae-yoon didn't expect that after she was used, Mrs. Choi Yi-jin would abandon her, so she left angrily. At the same time, No Young-won received another anonymous package. Inside was a book written by her mother-in-law. After reading the book, No Young-won took out the numbered photos that she had received. She discovered that the numbered photos 1 and 2 revealed the secrets of her father-in-law and Choi Yi-jin. She suspected that the sender wanted to reveal each person's lies in this order. Her mother-in-law was numbered 3, so she went to question her about the secret that she was hiding. She knew that only by knowing the truth could she deal with Lee Si-na's actions. Her mother-in-law was not surprised by this and said that the dead dove and the photos that No Young-won received were exactly the same as the plotlines in her novel. Therefore, this was not simply an affair, but a deliberate plan. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang promised to find Lee Si-na and told No Young-won to pay attention to her son, who was numbered 4, to see if her son was hiding anything from her. After school, No Young-won secretly followed her son. She discovered that he didn't go to tutoring but went with a girl and Choi Yi-jin's junior colleague. No Young-won didn't expose her son's lie but asked her younger brother to secretly investigate the junior colleague. When she got home, her mother-in-law led No Young-won to a small red house. Inside, it was filled with paintings by Lee Si-na. Each painting possessed a peculiar and flawed quality, but when pieced together, they formed the face of No Young-won. No Young-won suspected that Lee Si-na had been her patient for a long time, but Lee Si-na's motive for committing the crime remained a mystery. No Young-won began to worry about her son's safety and realized she had to find Lee Si-na quickly to protect her family. At that moment, Lee Si-na was burning photographs of No Young-won and her family in a tunnel. After finishing the burning, she danced around the flames. No Young-won and her mother-in-law drove back home and found someone standing in front of the door. When the person turned around, it turned out to be Choi Yi-jin, who had been missing for several days. The mother-in-law was moved and wanted to get out of the car, but No Young-won locked the car doors, stepped on the gas, and drove straight towards Choi Yi-jin. On the news, Choi Yi-jin was aghast to witness his mother and No Young-won desperately searching for his car on the island. He painfully realized that his plan to fake his death had been exposed. Sen, Choi Yi-jin's mistress, ordered him to go home, end everything with No Young-won completely, and only then could he return to her. Despite vehemently objecting and not wanting to return to that suffocating cage, Choi Yi-jin still had to succumb to Lee Si-na's coercion. and then he appeared at the front door, witnessing No Young-won driving the car towards him. Choi Yi-jin fearfully dodged out of the way and narrowly escaped death. The mother-in-law criticized No Young-won for being crazy. Choi Yi-jin dejectedly entered the house to talk to his son. The boy questioned him about his affair. Before, he always thought that both he and his father couldn't escape No Young-won's clutches. Now, his father had escaped, and only he was left. Choi Yi-jin couldn't explain adult matters clearly. He could only promise that no matter what, the father-son relationship between them would never change. He inquired about his son's well-being and his girlfriend. The boy seemed to have something on his mind but hesitated to speak. After talking with his son, the three adults finally had time to sit down and talk frankly. Choi Yi-jin's mother tried to reconcile the relationship between the two spouses. But No Young-won, deceived and betrayed, harbored deep resentment. She questioned Choi Yi-jin why he let Oh Jae-yoon perform the surgeries in his place, while he sat back and reaped the benefits. That action was cowardly and shameful. Choi Yi-jin asked if she didn't want to know the reason, but No Young-won said that no matter what reason he had, it couldn't justify his actions. Their conversation ended in tension. Looking at the family photo, No Young-won's gaze lingered on her son's face. She worried that Lee Si-na would target her child, so she resolved to quickly find out Lee Si-na's motives in order to counterattack. At this moment, Lee Si-na visited the church to see the children. She had been volunteering there for 8 consecutive years. She comforted a little girl who was waiting for her mother to pick her up and told her, "Don't forget your promise to me, which is to hate those who abandoned you." She also told the girl that she would make sure that those who make promises they don't keep would never be able to promise things they can't do again. At the same time, Oh Jae-yoon was looking at Lee Si-na's medical records, hoping to find clues to determine Choi Yi-jin's whereabouts. Choi Yi-jin's underling suddenly appeared. It seemed that he came here with a clear purpose. The underling told Oh Jae-yoon that Choi Yi-jin had once liked her, that she was the one who should be with Choi Yi-jin. At the same time, he revealed that Choi Yi-jin had returned home. Oh Jae-yoon quickly went to Choi Yi-jin's house, but she didn't go on her own accord. Choi Yi-jin had proactively invited her. Not only that, but Choi Yi-jin also called No Young-won's aunt and younger brother. Choi Yi-jin personally prepared a table full of food, inviting everyone to sit down for dinner. However, all the dishes on the table were fast food and had strong flavors. Facing everyone's puzzled looks, Choi Yi-jin slowly spoke. "These are all the things I like to eat the most." He had always lived under his mother's control. He wasn't even free to choose his own food preferences. Moreover, his mother knew that he suffered from hemophobia, fear of blood, and couldn't hold a scalpel, but she still forced him to study medicine. Therefore, Choi Yi-jin always had to direct Oh Jae-yoon to perform surgeries in his place and build his reputation as a star doctor. Now, Choi Yi-jin didn't want to live a lie anymore and wanted to expose the true face of this family. Choi Yi-jin continued, saying that No Young-won's father being framed years ago was caused by his father, and his mother knew everything about it. Not only that, but his mother had also proactively suggested marrying No Young-won to him to help his father deal with the aftermath. Mrs. Choi Yi-jin immediately denied it, saying that this had nothing to do with her. It was all Choi Yi-jin's father's idea. Unexpectedly, Choi Yi-jin released a recording of his parents' confrontation, proving that what he said was true. The family meal quickly turned into a farce. Everyone left one by one, leaving only Oh Jae-yoon with a triumphant smile. She believed that the greater the conflict between Choi Yi-jin and No Young-won, the more opportunity she had to be with Choi Yi-jin. But no one knew that Lee Si-na was monitoring everything happening at the dinner table through a surveillance camera. She thought Choi Yi-jin wouldn't be able to do this, but he exceeded her expectations, completely tearing away the family's facade of goodness. Choi Yi-jin packed his bags to go find Lee Si-na. This time, he came back to tell the truth in order to free himself and also to free No Young-won, who was being kept in the dark. No Young-won blamed Choi Yi-jin. "If you didn't want to maintain that fake facade, you should have said so sooner." Choi Yi-jin nearly collapsed. His mother wanted an obedient son, and Dong-gun wanted a perfect husband. Only by satisfying their demands could he keep this family together. But now, he just wanted to regain his freedom. Dong-gun advised Choi Yi-jin to come to his senses. Right now, he was being completely manipulated by Lee Si-nan, who only wanted to destroy this family. Choi Yi-jin frantically denied it and said that this was his choice. After speaking, he dragged his suitcase and left without looking back. No Young-won secretly followed Choi Yi-jin. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang also secretly followed No Young-won. All three of them went to the airport and saw Choi Yi-jin anxiously waiting for Lee Si-na. Not long after, Lee Si-na also arrived at the airport. But she didn't come to see Choi Yi-jin, she came to see another man. This man was none other than No Young-won's family bodyguard. The bodyguard advised Lee Si-na to run away with him. Lee Si-na vowed that they would be together forever, but first, she had to take revenge. Because she had been hurt so much by No Young-won, the only way to heal her wounded heart was through revenge. The bodyguard promised to treat Lee Si-na well. Taking this opportunity, Lee Si-na asked him to install cameras in No Young-won's living room. After arranging everything, Lee Si-na stood on the high floor looking down and saw Choi Yi-jin anxiously waiting. Along with him were No Young-won and her mother-in-law, secretly observing. Choi Yi-jin was destroying his own family with his own hands, and her heart was filled with glee. Choi Yi-jin couldn't wait for Lee Si-na and, dejected, went to his cosmetic surgery clinic. Dong-gun found him and gave him the family photo, explaining that everyone in the photo was marked with a serial number by Lee Si-na. She was targeting each person in the family one by one, in order. Choi Yi-jin didn't believe it. No Young-won was furious. She was worried that Lee Si-na's next target would be her son. Seeing that Choi Yi-jin was still indifferent, No Young-won picked up Choi Yi-jin's phone. Through the text messages Lee Si-na sent to Choi Yi-jin and the times they called each other, she suspected that Lee Si-na was monitoring their every move. Dong-gun returned home, used the phone's flashlight, and found 2 cameras installed in the dining room and living room. The next day, Oh Jae-yoon's police officer boyfriend came to see No Young-won. He presented a video of Lee Si-na being interrogated by the police after killing her third husband and suggested that she was mentally ill. Furthermore, Lee Si-na said that her parents and older sister died in a car accident. But he discovered a news report stating that Lee Si-na's parents and older sister died in a fire. The investigation information clearly stated that because Lee Si-na suffered from somnambulism sleepwalking, she slept outside in the yard on the night of the fire. The police couldn't investigate the real cause of the fire, and she was the only survivor. Later, Lee Si-na was adopted by a family in Norway, and the fire was forgotten. As a leading psychiatrist, No Young-won gave her assessment. She didn't know if Lee Si-na's memory was distorted due to a major psychological shock, or if she was lying. But based on the violent behavior caused by an excessive obsession with love, she could confirm that Lee Si-na was a very dangerous individual. After rethinking it, No Young-won seemed to discover something from Koo Kyung-tae's account and immediately ran home. Not long after, Lee Si-na received a text message sent by No Young-won. The message read, "If you loved your older sister so much, why did you kill her?" Lee Si-na cried out in horror and immediately called No Young-won. But No Young-won didn't answer the phone. She sat in front of the surveillance camera screen, looking at Lee Si-na with a provocative smile. No Young-won accused Lee Si-na of having a perverted infatuation with her older sister. Because of this infatuation, she had killed her parents, older sister, and 3 husbands. Lee Si-na retorted and told No Young-won not to think that she had found a way to deal with her, because there were things that No Young-won still didn't know. After confronting Lee Si-na, No Young-won was heartbroken by the act of covering up the truth about her father's death. She went to find her and asked about this issue. Mrs. Sa-gang evaded the issue, saying that the past was the past and the whole family should face the current difficulties together. No Young-won couldn't accept her mother-in-law's viewpoint. She took the camera to her, hoping she could find the villain hiding in the house. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang called the butler and the bodyguard to ask about any suspicious points. The bodyguard felt guilty, trying to hide his unusual expression. The mother-in-law didn't notice anything strange and handed this task over to Manager Hong, asking him to secretly investigate who the villain was. No Young-won and her mother-in-law were busy dealing with Lee Si-na, while Choi Yi-jin was distraught because he couldn't find Lee Si-na. He didn't want to go home and temporarily stayed at the cosmetic surgery clinic to confide in Oh Jae-yoon. Oh Jae-yoon pointed out that Lee Si-na was an evil woman. But Choi Yi-jin stubbornly believed that Lee Si-na was a good person. His mother and No Young-won always opposed him, and he didn't want Oh Jae-yoon to be like them. Oh Jae-yoon thoroughly enjoyed the feeling of being relied upon by Choi Yi-jin. She didn't say anything more and gently shaved his beard. Just when Oh Jae-yoon was content to be alone with Choi Yi-jin, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang suddenly arrived. She ordered Choi Yi-jin to go home immediately. She could tolerate him living a half-dead life because of a woman, but he couldn't forget his responsibilities as a father. Not long ago, his son's girlfriend suddenly came to see No Young-won. She bluntly presented an ultrasound photo and said that she was pregnant with No Young-won's son's child. Although she was in the crucial year of her senior year of high school 12th grade, the girl didn't want to have an abortion. She hoped No Young-won could send them both to study abroad. No Young-won's head was about to explode. She hadn't even solved the Lee Si-na issue, and now this happened. The mother-in-law saw the ultrasound photo and thought that No Young-won was pregnant with a second child. No Young-won had no choice but to tell her mother-in-law the truth. Mrs. Sa-gang believed that they couldn't keep the baby. Nothing could affect her grandson's future. She immediately took the photo and went to find Choi Yi-jin. Choi Yi-jin panicked upon hearing the news and hurriedly followed his mother home. Oh Jae-yoon resented Mrs. Hong Sa-gang for taking Choi Yi-jin away. At this time, she received a message from the underling. The underling once again seduced her. He said that Lee Si-na was Choi Yi-jin's salvation, but now Choi Yi-jin had been abandoned by her. The underling hoped that someone could save Choi Yi-jin once again. Oh Jae-yoon looked at the photo she took with Choi Yi-jin, her face revealing determination, as if she had made a decision. Choi Yi-jin went home to ask his son's opinion. He hoped his son would think carefully, but his son insisted on keeping the baby. At the same time, Mrs. Sa-gang and No Young-won went to meet the mother of his son's girlfriend. Although the mother was heartbroken that her daughter had done something wrong, what was done, and she demanded that the two children get married. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang didn't hesitate, wanting to solve the problem with money, so she asked, "Is 500 million won enough?" The girlfriend's mother wavered for a moment, but was still angry, stood up, and left. No Young-won chased after her to apologize, but the mother didn't accept it and strode away. No Young-won blamed her mother-in-law's approach as being wrong and demanded that she not interfere in this matter anymore. She would handle it herself. No Young-won's words hurt her mother-in-law and also reminded her of an old story. Years ago, she had an unintended miscarriage. The doctor announced that she was almost no longer able to conceive. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang was heartbroken, but after returning home, she saw a newborn child in the house. In the child's diaper was a note left by her husband's mistress. She hoped that the child could grow up in this family. Mrs. Choi Yi-jin both resented and hated her, but she didn't vent her anger on the child. On the contrary, she wholeheartedly raised him. Now, Mrs. Choi Yi-jin only hoped that Choi Yi-jin would never know the old story and that the two of them would remain as close as real mother and son. No Young-won returned home and was angrily scolded by her son. Her son believed that she was the one who did this. No Young-won immediately guessed that her mother-in-law was responsible. She demanded that her mother-in-law not interfere anymore, and to leave this matter to her. At this time, Lee Si-na sent her a message. It read, "Maternal love is so sacred and noble. It really brings tears to one's eyes." No Young-won temporarily didn't have time to pay attention to Lee Si-na. After thinking, she told her son that she would stand by him. Whatever decision her son made, she would support it. Just like that, the two reconciled. Choi Yi-jin smiled contentedly outside the door. But when No Young-won came out, the two remained silent. To investigate the details of the fire that occurred at Lee Si-na's house years ago, No Young-won sought out the criminal police officer in charge of the case that year. Knowing No Young-won's intention, the police officer didn't want to mention the past, until Dong-gun said that her family was being threatened by Lee Si-na. The police officer then revealed the truth. That year, Lee Si-na was not the only survivor of the fire, because Lee Si-na's older sister also survived. The older sister forbade the spread of information that she was still alive. She said that Lee Si-na had started the fire. The reason was that Lee Si-na wanted to kill their parents, but she knew that Lee Si-na did everything for her sake. The police wanted to reinvestigate the truth about the fire, but Lee Si-na had been adopted, so the matter gradually faded into oblivion. During this meeting, the police officer gave No Yong-won the address of Lee Si-na's older sister. No Yong-won went to the church where Lee Si-na volunteered. According to the address, she indeed found Lee Si-na's older sister there. No Yong-won interviewed the older sister, talking to her about family relationships and her younger sister, Lee Si-na. The older sister said that Lee Si-na had an obsessive love for her since she was young. She hated pigeons, so Lee Si-na twisted the pigeons' necks. A kitten scratched her, so Lee Si-na killed the kitten. From small animals to the boy next door, all were dealt with by Lee Si-na. She was increasingly out of control. Her parents wanted Lee Si-na to return to normal, so they locked her up. Unexpectedly, Lee Si-na harbored resentment in her heart and directly started the fire. Donggun sent the interview video to Lee Si-na. Lee Si-na angrily called. Hearing her anger, No Yong-won said that she would restore the truth of the past in a live broadcast. If she was afraid, she should come and stop her. Lee Si-na drove like a bullet to the studio. She arrived at her destination, but found that there was no one there, only No Yong-won was waiting for her. No Yong-won pointed out that she was afraid of her older sister being alive, so she rushed over so quickly. After all, her older sister was the only witness to the fire. With things having come to this point, Lee Si-na still believed that she was not wrong. It was her family who didn't accept her way of expressing love. After speaking, she madly questioned No Yong-won about where her older sister was. But No Yong-won told her that everything she had done was to deceive her. Her older sister was already dead. Upon hearing this, Lee Si-na revealed a malicious look and lunged to strangle No Yong-won. Her son, still a student, suddenly announced that his girlfriend was pregnant. While investigating the matter, the mother discovered a shocking secret hidden behind it all. To deal with Lee Si-na, No Yong-won used her older sister as bait. In reality, Lee Si-na's older sister had already passed away. When No Yong-won went to the church to gather information, a nun familiar with Lee Si-na's older sister revealed the truth. Lee Si-na had an obsessive affection for her older sister. Back then, Lee Si-na's older sister was frightened by a flock of pigeons on her way home from school, and Lee Si-na immediately took action against them. One night, Lee Si-na woke her older sister up. The older sister was horrified to discover that her parents' room on the second floor was engulfed in flames. She wanted to rush in to save her parents, but was stopped by Lee Si-na. She told her older sister, "It's all over. If there are no parents, you will love me, right?" Despite the obstruction, Lee Si-na's older sister still rushed into the flames but was unable to save her parents. The older sister miraculously survived the fire but suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and died a few years later due to mental breakdown. After learning the story, No Yong-won planned to lure Lee Si-na out. She had someone impersonate Lee Si-na's older sister and conduct a fake interview, then sent the video to Lee Si-na, pretending that her older sister was still alive. Lee Si-na took the bait and immediately went to the meeting point. The police and her assistant monitored Lee Si-na's every move, recording the scene of her strangling No Yong-won. The police rushed out to rescue No Yong-won. Lee Si-na realized she had been tricked, so she pushed No Yong-won away and ran away. After a chase, the police and No Yong-won caught Lee Si-na. The police interrogated Lee Si-na, forcing her to admit to arson and killing 3 husbands to collect insurance. However, Lee Si-na insisted on denying the charges and demanded that the police provide evidence. The police showed Lee Si-na the video of her strangling No Yong-won, proving that Lee Si-na intended to harm someone. Lee Si-na argued that it was just a quarrel between her and No Yong-won due to emotional conflicts, and it was all orchestrated by No Yong-won. The police told No Yong-won that if they couldn't find evidence of Lee Si-na's crime within 48 hours, they would have to release her. No Yong-won hurriedly returned home to collect evidence and find witnesses. She persuaded Oh Jae-yoon to testify about being attacked by Lee Si-na at the villa that day. However, Oh Jae-yoon believed that No Yong-won's family was taking advantage of her and only agreed to testify if No Yong-won ceded her position as the female head of the household to her. At the same time, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang was searching for the mole in the house. After investigation, she suspected the bodyguard. She and manager Hong set a trap. taking advantage of the moment when manager Hong drugged the bodyguard with alcohol to steal the car keys and the memory card from the dashcam in his car. She showed Choi Yi-jin and No Young-won the contents of the memory card. Choi Yi-jin witnessed Lee Si-na hugging and kissing the bodyguard with his own eyes. No Young-won asked her husband to testify to the police tomorrow, and Mrs. Hong Sa-gang asked her son to return to his original position. Choi Yi-jin was still in shock after the huge shock, remaining silent and speechless. Afterwards, No Young-won and her mother-in-law confronted the bodyguard, hoping he would testify. No Young-won determined that Lee Si-na suffered from antisocial personality disorder and that only by preventing her from continuing to commit crimes could she be saved. With the irrefutable evidence, the bodyguard admitted to having a romantic relationship with Lee Si-na, and that the installation of the cameras was instructed by Lee Si-na. Finally, the bodyguard was persuaded and agreed to testify to the police. At the police station, after a period of inner struggle, the bodyguard suddenly stated that the installation of the cameras in No Young-won's house was not instructed by Lee Si-na, but was his personal action. Due to lack of evidence, Lee Si-na was acquitted. As soon as she walked out of the police station, she met Choi Yi-jin. Choi Yi-jin wanted an answer. Had Lee Si-na considered him a pawn from the very beginning? Lee Si-na replied that, regardless of the process, she had helped Choi Yi-jin realize the life he truly desired. Then, Choi Yi-jin threatened to report Lee Si-na to the police for attacking Oh Jae-yoon at the villa that day. However, Lee Si-na turned the tables, falsely accusing Choi Yi-jin of injuring Oh Jae-yoon. As for her, because she was too scared when she saw blood, she hallucinated. Lee Si-na added, "No matter how you investigate, I didn't do anything wrong. Speaking of committing crimes, your family is even worse." While Choi Yi-jin was confronting Lee Si-na, No Young-won received a call from her son and hurriedly returned to the studio. Her son's girlfriend was also there. Both of them asked No Young-won to allow them to study abroad as soon as possible. No Young-won patiently analyzed. They were still students and not capable of taking care of a small child. Having the baby and then going to study abroad was the right choice. Not receiving No Young-won's agreement, they both left in disappointment. At that moment, No Young-won received a message from Lee Si-na with the content, "Is your son's secret really pregnancy?" No Young-won decided to talk to her son honestly. She respected every decision her son made, but because she was worried about his safety after receiving the threatening message, she hoped her son would not hide anything. Seeing the concern in his mother's eyes, the son hesitantly revealed a secret. The girlfriend and the pregnancy were both fake. They did it only because they wanted to go abroad quickly to be with the person he loved, and that person was a boy. No Young-won was quite surprised to hear her son's story. She tried to suppress her emotions, hugged her son, comforted him, and respected his choice. At the same time, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang and Choi Yi-jin had a heated argument. Choi Yi-jin could not tolerate his mother using the guise of love to bind his thoughts. "I'm not your biological son. Why do you treat me like this?" Mrs. Hong Sa-gang did not expect Choi Yi-jin to know this secret. For the first time, she revealed a look of defeat. Afterwards, No Young-won told Choi Yi-jin and her mother-in-law about her son's sexual orientation. Her mother-in-law's first reaction was to stop it, not wanting her grandson to suffer from the discriminatory eyes of society. However, No Young-won and her husband did not want their son to be pressured by his family just because of his gender. Yi-jin found his son to talk. Receiving understanding and support from his parents, the son felt relieved. Before, Choi Yi-jin's underling had told the son that someone like No Young-won would never understand him. Now, the underling's words were wrong. Choi Yi-jin ran into that underling and questioned why he said such things to his son. Unexpectedly, the underling provoked him, saying that Choi Yi-jin also had his own secrets that he dared not reveal to No Young-won. It seemed that Choi Yi-jin's secret was also related to sexual orientation. The underling asked, "Do you remember how you two met?" Angry, Choi Yi-jin grabbed the underling by the collar, intending to attack. The underling pushed Choi Yi-jin away, laughing wildly and savagely. In another development, No Young-won received a message from Zam, containing a link to her son and boyfriend's social media account. There were many affectionate photos of the two. At this time, Lee Si-na called No Young-won, saying that she would live stream this secret publicly. If she wanted to stop her, she should come find her. No Young-won went to the address Za sent. She was horrified to see her mother-in-law there, covered in blood. Next to her was the bodyguard's lifeless body. No Young-won worriedly asked about her mother-in-law's condition. At that moment, a white light flashed from outside. No Young-won was led to the villa by a message from Lee Si-na. Unexpectedly, she never appeared. What shocked her was the discovery that her mother-in-law was also there. More strangely, she was covered in blood. No Young-won bent down to check on her mother-in-law's condition. Before they could talk, police sirens rang out. The police rushed in, confirming that the bodyguard next to her was dead. The police took the two back to the station as suspects. Lee Si-na, who had arrived at the scene, walked past the undercover police officer and glanced at him. The police officer interrogated the mother-in-law and No Young-won separately, intentionally leading the mother-in-law to confess and wanting to accuse No Young-won of being an accomplice. No Young-won insisted that her mother-in-law could not be the culprit. The mother-in-law also confirmed that No Young-won only arrived at the scene after the bodyguard was dead. The mother-in-law was very firm. No Young-won arrived when she regained consciousness. Eventually, No Young-won proved her innocence and was released. No Young-won met her mother-in-law, who carefully recalled the events of the previous night. She received a message from Lee Si-na saying that she would expose the family's secrets. The mother-in-law blamed herself for not handling things well with Lee Si-na and decided to confront her herself. But as soon as she entered, someone suddenly gagged her from behind. She struggled and resisted, and the person cried out in pain, and it was a man's voice. She was stunned and passed out. When she woke up, she found herself holding a dagger, covered in blood, next to the bodyguard's dead body. No Young-won vowed to catch the culprit to rescue her mother-in-law. Choi Yi-jin protected No Young-won from the siege of reporters and returned home. He knelt before No Young-won, repenting for the crises he had caused. If No Young-won wanted to leave, he would not stop her. But No Young-won wanted to help Choi Yi-jin stand up. Right now, she didn't have time to care about their relationship. The urgent task was to catch Lee Si-na and save her mother-in-law. She hoped that Choi Yi-jin could regain his spirit and fight alongside her. No Young-won's younger brother and Choi Yi-jin's aunt, upon seeing the news about Mrs. Hong Sa-gang's assault case, rushed over immediately. At that moment, the police also arrived to investigate, asking everyone about their views on Mrs. Hong Sa-gang. Choi Yi-jin's aunt often didn't get along with her mother-in-law, but at this important moment, she also stood by her, believing that she couldn't be a murderer. The housekeeper also gave her testimony. Although the mother-in-law was somewhat arrogant, she was cold on the outside but warm on the inside and had repeatedly helped her family when they were in trouble. The police were still investigating when suddenly the underling arrived. He told the police that he was the tutor of the son in this family and was quite familiar with the No Young-won family. He had seen Oh Jae-yoon running out of here in tears. Before reporting to the police, he had met Oh Jae-yoon and suggested that the mother-in-law had always controlled Choi Yi-jin's thoughts. If the mother-in-law was convicted, no one could stop Oh Jae-yoon and Choi Yi-jin. He advised Oh Jae-yoon to seize this opportunity. Hearing the underling's words, the police decided to ask CEO Oh revealed that Mrs. Hong Sa-gang funded her only to use her medical work to help Choi Yi-jin perform surgeries. Oh Jae-yoon asserted that Mrs. Hong Sa-gang was a person who would stop at nothing to achieve her goals and could very well be the perpetrator of the assault. While the underling stirred things up from behind, Choi Yi-jin provided No Young-won with an important clue. The underling seemed to have problems. Choi Yi-jin shared with No Young-won the words the underling had said to his son, suspecting that the underling was intentionally trying to damage the relationship between No Young-won and her son. He also revealed the underling's true identity to No Young-won, that the underling had received psychological counseling at the mental clinic where he went for counseling. They both studied medicine, but couldn't hold a scalpel because they suffered similar pressures, and he thought they had many common topics to talk about. Now looking back, Choi Yi-jin felt that approaching him was just a trap set by the underling. Cautious, No Young-won recalled the identification characteristics of the perpetrator that her mother-in-law described. She thought the underling was very suspicious and asked Choi Yi-jin to investigate the underling further. When Choi Yi-jin and others arrived at the place where the underling interned, they discovered that the underling had used someone else's name, pretending to be a medical student. No Young-won received this news, and she concluded that the underling and Lee Si-na both intentionally approached Choi Yi-jin with a certain purpose. The behaviors of the two had many strange similarities. Lee Si-na had a distorted psychology about the family counseling work that No Young-won did, and perhaps the underling was the same. No Young-won searched the medical records of patients with family problems like Lee Si-na, and she found a boy named Oh Jae-hwan. Years ago, Oh Jae-hwan's mother brought him for counseling because he was disobedient. Every day, his body was wrapped in bandages. No Young-won saw wounds on Oh Jae-hwan's mother's wrist and suspected that the boy's problems stemmed from family causes. The mother hurriedly denied it and dragged Oh Jae-hwan away. No Young-won tried to persuade the mother not to continue to endure, because if the parents didn't change, the child couldn't change either. On the other hand, Choi Yi-jin went to the church where Lee Si-na participated in charity work to investigate. He discovered that besides Lee Si-na, there was also a man named Thomas who frequently came here. Choi Yi-jin suddenly realized that Thomas was the underling. The nun announced that Thomas also grew up here, and his real name was Oh-won. Choi Yi-jin immediately informed No Young-won of this news. No Young-won suspected that the underling was actually Oh Jae-hwan. She suddenly remembered when Oh Jae-hwan's mother left. She saw her leading two children. Oh Jae-hwan and Oh-won were twins. Meanwhile, No Young-won received a message from Manager Hong. Mr. Hong, in an effort to rescue the mother-in-law, investigated the strangers entering and leaving the nearby villa. Based on the description of the villagers, he drew a portrait of this person. No Young-won was shocked to realize that the person in the portrait was the underling, that is, Oh-won. Lee Si-na received a call from the nun informing her that Choi Yi-jin was investigating her and Oh-won. Angry, Lee Si-na blamed Oh-won for acting rashly, ruining her work. She reminded him that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't be able to take revenge. Oh-won recalled watching No Young-won on television, and he gnashed his teeth in anger. At that moment, Lee Si-na appeared beside him and told him that to take revenge, he had to have a new life. Lee Si-na found him a new home, bought him new clothes, and transformed him from a poor laborer into an intellectual. Since then, Oh-won and Lee Si-na had joined forces, step by step, to reach today. Now, on Lee Si-na's orders, Oh-won left to avoid trouble. As soon as the car started, he unexpectedly received a message from No Young-won's son. No Young-won's son told him that No Young-won didn't accept him and begged him to help. Oh-won thought he had achieved his goal, happily got out of the car and went to No Young-won's house, unaware that this was No Young-won's plan to lure him out of his hiding place. Meanwhile, the police received a call saying that they had found the real perpetrator of the assault case at the villa. The police immediately went to the address provided. At this time, Lee Si-na was in the room, staging the scene of the murder. Oh-won happily arrived at No Young-won's house, but only met her. No Young-won had turned on the recording on her phone beforehand. Oh-won asked about No Young-won's son, but she bluntly revealed the truth. Oh-won was born in the church orphanage but pretended to be a student at Korea University. In fact, he was the twin brother of Oh Jae-hwan. Oh-won, a man who was called to the villa by his girlfriend, saw a bottle of red wine on the table and thought his girlfriend wanted to toast him. Unexpectedly, he was gagged from behind and knocked unconscious. His girlfriend coldly held a knife and planned to send him to meet his maker. 3 days ago, Lee Si-na and Oh-won had disagreed about how to handle No Young-won's son's secret. Oh-won advocated for public exposure because he wanted to witness No Young-won's pain and collapse with his own eyes. Meanwhile, Lee Si-na wanted to torture No Young-won slowly. Human imagination was limitless, and she wanted to gradually release the bait, causing No Young-won to endure the torment in imagination and anticipation. Seeing Lee Si-na pull out the knife with a fierce look, Oh-won could only follow her arrangements. Lee Si-na called the bodyguard to the villa and had Oh Jae-hwan knock the bodyguard unconscious from behind. Then, she cruelly took the life of the bodyguard who had always served her faithfully. Lee Si-na staged a fake murder scene. Initially, she wanted to stage a scene where the bodyguard was fired by No Young-won, so he was dissatisfied and had a conflict with No Young-won and was accidentally killed by her. She had Oh-won handle the cleanup. Oh-Wan felt that it was finally his turn to take action. He insisted that destroying No Young-won's family was more effective than directly dealing with her. Therefore, he sent a message to Mrs. Hong Sa-gang, waited for her to arrive at the scene, then knocked her unconscious and staged a fake scene where she had harmed the bodyguard. When watching the video of No Young-won and her mother-in-law being arrested, Lee Si-na realized that Oh-Wan didn't follow her instructions. To escape suspicion, she could only eliminate the pawn, Oh-Wan. She staged the crime scene in the room, and after completing everything, she reported the real perpetrator of the assault in the villa to the police. The police arrived at the scene and discovered the lease agreement written in Oh-Wan's name. All the clues pointed to him. The police informed No Young-won that they had found the real culprit. No Young-won said that she had a way to capture Oh-Wan. After that, Oh-Wan received a message from No Young-won's son and showed up at her house. No Young-won called out his real name and exposed that he was the one who knocked her mother-in-law unconscious in the villa. She questioned him whether it was because of the events of 16 years ago that he harbored resentment in his heart. No Young-won still remembered his twin brother and his mother. At that time, she thought the mother and sons would come back. Hearing this, Oh-Wan suddenly smashed No Young-won's family photo frame, picked up the glass shards on the ground, and cursed, believing that everything was No Young-won's fault. As he spoke, he wanted to attack her. Choi Yi-jin rushed out in time and tackled Oh-Wan. The two wrestled on the ground. Oh-Wan wanted to use the glass shard in his hand to attack Choi Yi-jin. In a critical moment, No Young-won grabbed a table lamp and hit him on the head. Oh-Wan went crazy, knocking No Young-won down. Seeing that the couple couldn't subdue him, the siren suddenly rang. Oh-Wan fled in fear, but was blocked by No Young-won's younger brother outside. Just like that, Oh-Wan was taken to the police station. No Young-won also learned that, in Oh-Wan's family, everyone except him had died. No Young-won spoke with Oh-Wan. She wanted to know what happened that year. Oh-Wan blamed everything on No Young-won. It turned out that after the three of them went home that night, his father drank alcohol again, and his mood became irritable. His mother protected her children, saying that No Young-won had said that it was all her husband's fault, and for the sake of her children, she had to change. The resistance only made his father worse. His mother didn't want to endure the constant torment anymore, so she planned to take action against her husband with a knife at night, but unexpectedly, she was killed by him. His father went into the children's room with a knife. Oh-Wan hurriedly ran away and escaped. He always believed that if No Young-won hadn't said that to his mother, she wouldn't have changed, and their family wouldn't have been destroyed. No Young-won couldn't convince Oh-Wan's extreme thinking. She could only advise him that he was just a pawn in Lee Si-na's hand. Now, he had been abandoned by Lee Si-na. Oh-Wan looked crazed, not believing that Lee Si-na would treat him like this. After capturing Oh-Wan, the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law discussed how to deal with Lee Si-na. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang gave a detailed analysis. Lee Si-na's trick was to target the people around them and turn them into her assistants. Now, they had to pay close attention to the movements of the people around them. Having gone through so much, Choi Yi-jin went to the hospital. He wanted to officially leave the hospital and hand it over to Oh Jae-yoon. But Oh Jae-yoon only wanted to possess Choi Yi-jin and was still fantasizing about rescuing Choi Yi-jin from his family. She even threatened Choi Yi-jin that if he didn't listen to her, she would expose the surrogate surgery. Choi Yi-jin was no longer afraid of anything, so he would no longer be controlled by the surrogate surgery. After Choi Yi-jin left, Oh Jae-yoon was furious. At this moment, Lee Si-na unexpectedly appeared, gradually luring her. She was the one who performed the surgery, but Choi Yi-jin was the one who was praised. But she had sacrificed everything without getting what she wanted. If No Young-won's family was destroyed, Choi Yi-jin would definitely come to her. Oh Jae-yoon fell into Lee Si-na's trap. She revealed to the media that Mrs. Hong Sa-gang had funded her to perform surrogate surgery for Choi Yi-jin. No Young-won's son watched the news, resenting his father's actions, and hoped that Choi Yi-jin would take responsibility. Choi Yi-jin calmly accepted everything, deciding to bravely admit his mistakes. At this moment, the assistant informed No Young-won that someone had announced to the media that No Young-won would hold a press conference at 5 p.m. Moreover, someone had sent an anonymous package. The whole family knew that this was another one of Lee Si-na's tricks. When they opened the package, there were scary things inside. Lee Si-na demanded that No Young-won do as she said. She forced No Young-won to admit that she always treated patients but concealed her own family's problems, including the fact that No Young-won's father was framed to death by her father-in-law. No Young-won knew that if she didn't do as Lee Si-na said, she would publicly reveal her son's secret. She didn't want her son to be pushed to the forefront. Her son bravely stood up, not wanting to be the reason for his mother to compromise. As long as he had his family's support, he wasn't afraid of the gossip of the outside world. No Young-won thought for a long time and arrived at the press conference location right on time. Oh Jae-yoon also came here, waiting to see No Young-won make a fool of herself. At the same time, Lee Si-na was also monitoring everything she had painstakingly arranged in front of the screen. No Young-won, in front of the media, read word for word what Lee Si-na had asked. But then, she tore up the manuscript, frankly saying that the above was what Lee Si-na had used her family's secrets to force her to read. Next, she projected Lee Si-na's photo on the big screen, exposing Lee Si-na's crimes of arson, burning down her entire family, and killing 3 husbands to defraud insurance. She declared that she must capture Lee Si-na. Oh Jae-yoon didn't expect Lee Si-na to be a serial killer, and she was so scared that she had to take medicine to calm down. Lee Si-na walked out with a gloomy face, her eyes fierce as if signaling that she had even more terrible tricks. Before long, No Young-won received a call from her son's classmate saying that her son had disappeared after going to the bathroom. No Young-won hurriedly called her son, but unexpectedly, Lee Si-na answered the phone. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang went to the police station to meet Oh-won. Prior to this, Oh-won had received a note that Lee Si-na had hidden in the lunchbox. She promised to save him but asked him to help stall for time and definitely not to confess. In order to make Oh-won confess, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang secretly turned on the recording on her phone before Oh-won came to the room. When Oh-won arrived, she directly pointed out that he was the one who drugged and framed her. The reason was that the bodyguard had lived in her house for a long time and always used perfume, so he always had a faint fragrance. However, the attacker that day reeked. The police officer approached and smelled Oh-won's body and accepted that he had a smell on him. Oh-won immediately fell into the trap, clumsily explaining that he clearly wore protective clothing that day, so how could there be a smell? Mrs. Hong Sa-gang smiled, presented the recording, and affirmed that he was the one who harmed the bodyguard. Oh-won hurriedly denied it, pointing out that the one who harmed the bodyguard was Lee Si-na. And that was exactly what Mrs. Hong Sa-gang wanted. With Oh-won's accusation, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang ordered the police to immediately apply for a search and arrest warrant for Lee Si-na. At this time, Oh-won realized that he had fallen into Mrs. Hong Sa-gang's trap, but it was too late. Lee Si-na was shopping in the supermarket at this time. Everyone around her was talking about her case. To avoid being recognized, she covered her face and hurried away. Just then, she saw No Young-won's son and his classmate. To take revenge, she took advantage of the moment when No Young-won's son went to the bathroom to lose him and kidnap the boy. No Young-won collapsed upon hearing the news that her son had been kidnapped by Lee Si-na. Lee Si-na warned No Young-won that if she dared to report to the police, she would immediately take action against her son. Soon after, Lee Si-na sent a video. In the video, Lee Si-na was pouring gasoline on No Young-won's son and threatening her to come to the villa alone before dawn. Otherwise, she would press the phone to turn on the electric ignition switch underground. At that time, No Young-won's son would be engulfed in flames. No Young-won went crazy, wanting to rush to the villa immediately. Her mother-in-law tried to pull her back, asking her to calm down. In the video, the place where No Young-won's son was being held was clearly the basement. But the villa didn't have a basement. That proved that No Young-won's son wasn't there. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang gathered everyone to analyze the clues. Lee Si-na had said that if she reported to the police, No Young-won's son would die in solitude. This meant that the place where the boy was being held was a very remote place. Lee Si-na's old house and the orphanage were all suspicious locations. Everyone split up and took action. No Young-won waited outside the villa for news. Choi Yi-jin searched every corner of the orphanage but still couldn't find his son's whereabouts. He reported the news to No Young-won. With morning approaching, No Young-won feared that further delay would anger Lee Si-na. So, she got out of the car and entered the villa. The villa had been filled with gasoline by Lee Si-na. She held a lighter, questioning No Young-won. Your family considered you a monster and abandoned you. You go to psychological counseling. No Young-won once said that if a family has problems, they should cut ties. But your father-in-law killed your father, and your husband betrayed you. Why didn't No Young-won choose to leave? Lee Si-na didn't believe that families would never abandon each other because her family had never tried to understand her. They said that her distorted psychology was her fault. No Young-won advised Lee Si-na that her own stubbornness had caused her family to leave her. It was still not too late to regret it. No Young-won was willing to help. Seeing that Lee Si-na's emotions had softened somewhat, No Young-won continued to advise. It's still not too late, as long as Lee Si-na spares her son. Hearing the words, her son, Lee Si-na suddenly came to her senses. If No Young-won couldn't cut ties with her family, she would help her. After speaking, Lee Si-na planned to press the phone. No Young-won rushed to grab the phone. Unexpectedly, the lighter in Lee Si-na's hand fell to the ground, igniting the gasoline. The room suddenly burst into flames. No Young-won and Lee Si-na struggled to grab the phone, but in the end, Lee Si-na snatched it. Before No Young-won's eyes, Lee Si-na pressed the button. No Young-won screamed in despair, losing all reason. At this moment, Choi Yi-jin received a message from his mother, knowing that their son had been rescued safely. He rushed over and shouted to let No Young-won know that their son was okay. Seeing the flames rising more and more fiercely, No Young-won wanted to rush in to save Lee Si-na, but Lee Si-na didn't want to leave, still engrossed in dancing in the flames. No Young-won was pulled out of the house by her husband. Not long after, No Young-won woke up in a hospital bed, seeing her son lying beside her. Her heart was relieved of a heavy burden. No Young-won worriedly asked about Lee Si-na's condition. Her mother-in-law told her that Lee Si-na had died in the fire. As soon as she finished speaking, Oh Jae-yoon entered the hospital room. She still couldn't understand why Mrs. Hong Sa-gang could accept No Young-won but couldn't let her be her daughter-in-law. Oh Jae-yoon became more and more agitated as she spoke, pulled out a scalpel, and lunged towards Mrs. Hong Sa-gang. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang comforted Oh Jae-yoon and was injured in the hand by the knife. Because she was too agitated, Oh Jae-yoon fainted. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang stayed by her side and took care of her until she woke up. Oh Jae-yoon's mood had calmed down. Perhaps she also understood that she didn't love Choi Yi-jin but just wanted a title so she could rightfully have a home. Everything had been resolved smoothly. Choi Yi-jin begged his wife for forgiveness. But forgiveness was only a matter of time. What was important was the relationship between husband and wife. They couldn't go back to the way things were. No Young-won suggested that the most important thing they needed to do at this moment was to temporarily put aside the thoughts of living for others. Having gone through this incident, Mrs. Hong Sa-gang also realized something. She always had the idea that family meant being together around the dining table to create an ideal family according to her own wishes. Each member had to live according to her wishes. Clearly, each person was an independent individual, but was forced into a circle called us, focusing on the family to do everything, completely ignoring their own feelings. Mrs. Hong Sa-gang announced, "From now on, each person will separate from this house and live their own life." After the last meal together, she packed her bags, left, and lived the life she had always dreamed of. Choi Yi-jin also went to the Korean Medical Association, admitted to impersonating surgery, left the hospital, and opened a stray cat and dog care center. He was very satisfied with his daily life when he was close to the small animals. Oh Jae-yoon, although she always had feelings for him, also let go of her obsession, found the love of her life, and had a home of her own. As for No Young-won, she continued her work as a psychological counselor. This time, her patient was Oh Tae-won, who was still serving his sentence in prison. She had failed to save Lee Si-na, had some regrets in her heart, and wanted to make up for that shortcoming in Oh Tae-won. As for Lee Si-na, her actions were indeed extreme, but the desire to be loved and recognized was not wrong. No Young-won wanted to tell Lee Si-na that she deserved to be loved. Listening to No Young-won's answer, Oh was moved and no longer opposed her treatment. Today, No Young-won went to the bookstore and noticed the novel Our Family. Skimming through the contents, she affirmed that this was a novel written by her mother-in-law. Before leaving, her mother-in-law didn't say clearly where she was going, but from the book, No Young-won learned her current location, a snow mountain range that stretched endlessly. No Young-won traveled a long distance to meet her mother-in-law. After a year of reunion, the two mothers and daughters sat and chatted in the yard, reflecting on the mistakes in the past. They had always tried to maintain the perfect image of the family, not accepting any stains. Now thinking about it, it was indeed very ridiculous. "Mother, try some," he picked it himself. The mother-in-law looked tenderly at the man who was carefully holding a flower with snow in his hand. No Young-won finally understood that, perhaps because of this man's companionship, her mother-in-law would no longer feel lonely. No Young-won said goodbye to her mother-in-law and left. Looking back on the journey, she realized that she had been bound by the concept of a perfect family. The whole family worked hard for that concept. But what was considered a perfect family? Everything depended on the mindset. Perhaps the most important thing is to accept imperfection, instead of trying to change and transform everything according to one's own wishes. Now, No Young-won's family is scattered in different places, living the lives they desire, but the familial bond is always strong, never fading with time and distance. The drama ends here. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more great movies. Goodbye and see you again.